today we are talking about servers and hosting. Specifically, of course, using an open source stack like Python and Django. And it brings us to something really kind of big and obvious. I mean, the first one is Windows versus Linux.
Right. I mean, Linux is one of those like, oh, using Linux, uh-oh. But the thing is that most of these tools, Python, Django, your web servers, Apache, whatnot, they're all built on Linux. They're all designed for Linux. And since you're not using .NET and the Windows languages, it's actually like more of a pain to get it set up on Windows.
Because if you're using the Windows stack, then don't watch this video.
Yeah.
But seriously, I mean, there's not much point in running the open source stack on top of Windows. I've seen it done before behind like intranet network setups, and in fact I've worked on them, and it's a bad thing. At
first you're like, well, I don't want to learn Linux, or I don't want to have to find a guy who learns Linux, and Linux is scary.
You still have to learn how to have a web server behind.
Yeah, and when you try to run all these things designed for Linux on Windows, it's just a hack.
And it was funny because I remember that website specifically, they could have got a $6 a month host, DreamHost or something.
Oh, licensing on Windows is a pain.
Exactly. So you have something, and especially when you're talking about these remote hosts that we prefer,
right?
They cost, we prefer Linode, and they cost $20 a month, and you can select the locations, and they're probably triple or quadruple power backed up. They have extremely fast screaming networks.
Yeah, the VPS hosts, which we'll get into, they know what they're doing. You're not working with only, it's like open source software on like legitimate hosts. They do this, they know what they're doing. So just to get into, we say use Linux, right? Well, that's kind of generic because
what does that mean?
There's 20 popular ones. We personally just use Ubuntu. You could argue that there's, ones designed for servers, and there's ones, maybe the BSD side is like more correct and all this stuff. But it's kind of like, look, if you use the most popular one, you're going to have the most support. They have the most people fixing stuff, most people working on it.
And are we even using the server edition? Or
we are,
just,
yeah.
Okay.
Any VPS you use, if you choose Ubuntu, it's going to have the server stack on it.
So it doesn't have the GTK.
Yeah, you're not using a GUI.
Yeah.
You're using shell, but your programmers know how to do that.
But before you get too far into shell, we think there's a lot to be said for just picking tools that are popular.
Right.
I mean, we're not trying to run Photoshop here on a remote server. So don't worry about trying to do everything. Can you serve your website intelligently, run the database on it, run, I don't know, even network storage and all that? Yes, you can, because everyone has been doing this with Ubuntu. And if you search any problem, I mean, most of the problems that you're going to run into, there's going to be an answer for it. That's really, really valuable.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the same. It's the ideal versus, the more popular one. Yeah, there's more ideal server distros. But Ubuntu is just the most popular. You can make an argument it's not as stable, maybe go to Debian or something, but it's just like, it just kind of mostly works. And you don't really run into problems.
And remember, we were using Debian for quite a while, and we ran into a pretty basic issue, which is the packages were just too old.
And that's the thing, is Debian, they do their whole, we're stable. But they're 2 years old on everything. So then you're like, hey, I need to upgrade to, client wants to use Python 2.7 with Django 1.3.
Yeah, you're in Mercurial, and it's 2 years old or whatever.
Nope, doesn't work, because they're running, I think Debian's on Python 2.5. It's like it's Python 2.7.
It was like back in NOM, man.
Yeah. So it's just kind of use the up-to-date one, use Ubuntu. Everyone uses it. It just works. So I guess to move on to, you've picked Ubuntu. You've picked Linux. Do you want to host on a VPS like you were saying, or do you want to do custom hosting?
Good question. There's some options here. Well, let's kind of outline the options a little bit.
There are a bunch of options.
The main option is, do you want to, I guess I'm thinking 3 categories. Do you want to open a rack, meaning you're renting a space of racks?
You go to Time Warner, you buy a rack, you put your server, and they give you a
rack space, or there's a few others in the big cities that you can rent from. You walk into the room, you put your servers in there.
Right.
No, don't do that.
We've actually done that back in the day, and at first it's really cool, and then something breaks and you got to drive down there, and then you got to like pull your server apart and buy your own switches, and you basically have to have
And then
like
the hailing gas, and it's like intention. You have to have the cards.
yeah, you go in there and they're like,
servers
if you hear a siren, run because we're going to kill you. You're going
to be locked in and you will die. But it's like, how much options do you need? Yes, you can save some money. Well, okay, that's a trade-off.
Save some money. You're spending thousands of dollars up front.
You could. Okay. What I'm trying to say is that if you think of the rental fees of having a remote server, you're like, why is that $150? And it only has 4 gigs of RAM. I could spend, much less than that and get more RAM. And do the math though, and you'll come probably to one of the other options that we're going to talk about, which is a more managed situation. Meaning, if you look at something like Linode, and they have the dedicated VPSs, which means that they're autonomous. I mean, the kernel, it depends how they do their architecture. Some do it differently, but sometimes the kernel is shared between on one system and everyone shares the same kernel. Sometimes they completely silo it, and your kernel is its own runtime, and it's not touching the others, but it's on the same box. And you think, well, this is diminished power, and it's weak, and it's not going to handle my load.
But you don't really run into that,
unless you programmed really bad, but that's going to crunch a $4,000.
Right, and the thing is, if you end up with 100,000 users, you're not going to spend, thousands and thousands of dollars making a huge. You're going to go to, Amazon and stuff and do your scaling. But when you're building a project, you don't really need to worry about scaling because you don't have users yet,
Yeah, I mean that, and that's a really great point. Get something that works really well for the next few months,
or even the next year before, when you build your project, and then you get your family members to use your project.
I mean, you can make an argument for rack-spaced servers and that sort of thing if you're a larger corporation, if you're probably not watching these videos.
Probably not.
But we're talking about is your company doing, $1 to a few $1 million or less a year, then you need to consider options where you don't need a full-time sysadmin just to watch these boxes, and to where your programmers can get in and restart it easily remotely.
Right. So to go into the VPS hosting, the one we like is called Linode. Another really common one that you might have guessed is Amazon, right? Amazon, we've used a few times for a couple of our projects, but in general, Amazon's kind of a bigger solution, right? And it's a bit more complicated. It scales better. It kind of does more fancy stuff. But for getting a project, especially one that doesn't have users yet, you're building it from scratch or from very low point, you don't really need all that Amazon gives you. And then the thing is Amazon introduces complexity because you pay by the CPU cycle. You know how many CPU cycles you use?
4.
No. Not cores, cycles. I don't even know what that means.
5?
Yeah. So once you have an ongoing project, it kind of makes sense. But up front, just use like Linode, or another nice one's called SixSync. Basically, what you do with that is you spend $20 a month or 40, or you go big and you spend 60. Ooh, $60 a month. And you get root access to a virtual server that has more than enough power for a couple of your devs to make a project. You have, a generic dashboard, if you will. You can start, reboot, you can swap disk images, you can transfer profiles.
Okay, before you geek out on that too much, I mean, this is useful for almost, you could scale even on something like Linode, because really it's a Linux environment talking to another Linux environment. So if you wanted a heartbeat setup or anything like that, and you needed this OS to kick in when this one's overburdened, you can still do all of that. However, Amazon, those type of cloud solutions, automated. Elastichost, they're more automated. And something like Elastichost is more vertical. That gets kind of into the Heroku solution. Whereas Heroku is more of a black box.
Right.
And it does a lot for you, and that's attractive to some people that
are not sysadmins.
Yes.
But the thing is if you're really going like legitimate on this project, your devs probably know how to use servers enough. then you get like a part-time sysadmin who can go in there. He's like, I'm going to install this and that and put this package, and you're good.
You can get a contractor to come in there and
Yeah,
fix
like-
things up. Yeah, you got to trust them, but you know what? Here's a secret. Here's what nobody wants your code. Nobody wants it. They're not going to steal your idea
Because
and make money with it. And
as you know, there's a heck of a lot more that goes on than just the code.
are you making money with your code yet? You know,
No, then how could someone who's like doing something else, they're like, I'm going to steal this guy and make more money than... No, he's not.
So anyways, find someone that has decent ratings, or for a company, you know, like Bixley that has a Better Business Bureau rating, and then you could sue them. I mean, right? They're in the U.S.
Don't.
We'll sue you back.
But yeah, and then just kind of on the other side of this, just to mention it, some hosting, they do, you know, they have cPanel, as it's called.
Or Plesk.
Or Plesk, right? And it's basically you don't really touch your server.
And this goes in more to traditional VPS. Like they're setting up a server environment for you.
And then everything you do is through their website.
And you don't get root access. You get shell access possibly, but it's not root access.
You literally have to, on some of them, you call them, and then they give you like, and you're just like, what? No, I want to install this package. Well, that's not built into cPanel, so you can't do it. So cPanel, it's like, just don't try to make large projects behind it. We've had like several clients come to us, and we're just like,
well, and it's a very small dollar difference. You might get that host for $6 or $10 a month, whereas a small Linode costs you $20, and you can restart it with more RAM.
what is that? 30 minutes of development time?
Exactly.
A dev, you know, costs you $20 an hour, let's say, or 30. You save $10 a month on your host?
Not the right place to save money.
No.
So we were really comfortable with those types of solutions, the Linode type of solution, because it just gives you so many options. If you really need to, you can move the images around to someone else's account.
But that's the thing, is that what you're worried about right now is making your project. Don't waste a bunch of time, a bunch of stressing out, a bunch of money, setting up the perfect server solution.
Don't do it.
Because
screw perfect. I mean, screw it. Literally. You need to hate perfect right now.
It doesn't matter how good your server is if you don't have a project to run.
And I mean, this almost goes into a little bit more business philosophy, but you're building your project. It's much more important to really scrutinize your idea and your core users and talk with them and get the idea just perfect and smooth. That's much more important than getting BSD up because you thought it would be use 10% less RAM over the month.
Yeah.
Oh, don't even think like that.
That only matters when you have 100,000 users, which you're not going to have 100,000 users if you wasted all your money on your server.
Probably not watching this video if you have 100,000 users.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't matter yet. And this is like you're starting out or your project is kind of there, but your family's using it. You know?
Exactly.
So
anyways, those are our thoughts on hosting and with the open source stack. And we hope you enjoyed it. Check us out at Bixley.com.
Thanks, guys.